very much. Thank you. It was a great pleasure to be here in Düsseldorf, and I want to say thank you to you, first of all, for listening to me in English. I assure you it works better than me speaking in German. That's not a very good result. I have about 3 words of German. So I'm very grateful for that. If you don't understand anything, please do feel free to ask and stop me. If it's a question, I do suggest we leave them till the end. We have plenty of time at the end for questions. And you're going to have 90 minutes of me talking. This is, both barrels. This is a big summary of what we do, and I'm going to cover a lot of ground in 90 minutes. So if you have a question at the beginning, there's a good chance it'll get answered somewhere along the line. If it hasn't been, I'm really delighted to answer questions at the end. Let me just introduce myself a little bit and explain what it is that I do. My company is called the Sound Agency. So it's particularly nice for me to be talking to a group of people who care passionately about sound, which I'm sure all of you do. Most of the time, I speak to people who've never thought about sound. And actually, that's most people out there. So this is really nice. We're among friends here. We have a common language. The Sound Agency works with brands all over the world, helping them to answer the question, how does your brand sound? Many of them have never thought about that. It's strange but true. They spend a lot of time thinking about the eyes, no time thinking about the ears. So these are some of the brands, and I'm going to give you this case study a little bit later on. Harrods, we're particularly proud of this because 2 days ago in Oxford in the UK, we had the Audio Branding Congress, which is a coming together of all of the practitioners of audio sound branding around the world. There are 130 people there. There were 7 finalists for the 2012 Audio Branding Award, and I'm very glad to say that that was the winner. So we won the award, and we're really, really thrilled with that. And I'll show you why we won it a little bit later on. So that's what we do for a living. Along the way, I've been doing this for about 10 years now. My background is I'm a musician. I'm a drummer, and I've heard all the jokes, so we don't need to go there. I think my favorite one is, how do you tell if the stage is level? Answer, the drummer is drooling out of both sides of his mouth. So that's what we drummers have to put up with. And we tell those jokes about anyway, so it's okay. So I've been playing music all my life. And my previous career was in marketing. I started and grew a company producing magazines for companies. And all the way through that, I was playing music. So when I sold that business, I wanted to bring the 2 halves of me together, the marketing half and the listening sound half. So the Sound Agency was born in 2003. And in 2007, I wrote this book, Sound Business, which was quite important for us because the market was really small when we started. Almost so small you wouldn't notice it. And the book has helped to make it a real thing because it laid out a lot of the theory about simple stuff about sound. I mean, you've probably read much more complicated books than this. It's aimed at business people, not technical people at all. But it helps them to understand how powerful sound is and gives them lots of suggestions for ways it can be deployed in business. And I'm not talking just about advertising. It could be the sound in your reception. It could be the sound in your toilets. And I will give you a case study of toilet sound a little bit later on. Also, we've been featured a great deal, especially in the last few years, in the media. And this is exciting because what it tells me is people have a real fascination for sound. So I don't know if, when you say what you're studying to people at a party, I imagine most people say, well, that's really interesting. Engineering, sound, music, people love it. When I say what I do, people have that response. And the media particularly do. They love stories about sound in places affecting people because they've never thought about it. I think there's this great undiscovered fascination with sound out there. And I think we're very lucky to be working with it. And over the last few years, I've also been honored to be featured on the TED. Has anybody not come across TED in this audience? I'm giving you a gift. So go and check out, after this, straight away, don't go anywhere else, go and check out TED.com. It stands for Technology, Entertainment and Design, and it's an amazing conference that's held twice a year, once in Long Beach in February in Los Angeles, and once in Edinburgh now in the UK. And it features incredible speakers. I mean, I'm not talking about me, but some incredible speakers. And I've been very honored to give 4 talks on TED.com, all about sound, about different aspects of sound. And they've been seen now, I think, something like 5 million times on the web. So this is good because it shows, again, massive interest in sound. So I think we have this interest to look at. Let's start with a simple observation, and one that I'm sure you've all pondered, which is that everything is actually vibration. I mean, we are made of vibration, pretty much. If you break down matter to the smallest things that we know of, which are, as far as I know at the moment, still strings. String theory, I think, is still the limit of the small, as well as superstrings being the limit of the huge. Those strings are vibrating. So you're made effectively of countless, God knows how many, tiny little vibrating strings. And the strings make up, eventually, atoms, and the atoms make up molecules, and the molecules make up cells, and everything is vibrating. In fact, absence of vibration is death. Pure stillness, there's no life in that. So vibration underlies everything. Sound, of course, is one kind of vibration. But with all that vibration going on you, I think it's quite fun to think of yourself actually as a chord, effectively. So you have all these different vibrations going on. You make a note, a chord, more than one note, a chord. And perhaps that's something we can pick up, I don't know. Maybe in time we'll discover that people can somehow perceive that. And maybe that's why we like people on site or don't. Who knows? You can also see sound, of course. Have you come across cymatics? So just the simplest form of cymatics, this is the vowel A. It's what you get if you put the vowel A through a metal plate with sand on it. The sand forms a pattern. And these patterns can become much more sophisticated. This one on the right here is much more beautiful. They start to remind us of flowers or snowflakes, patterns that we see in nature. And there are people experimenting now with 3-dimensional cymatics, which are amazing in liquids, and generating them artificially. It's quite an interesting form of study. Of course, the first sound you ever heard is this. And it's pretty loud where we all came from. I've seen, most studies I've seen say it's more than 100 decibels in there. It's loud. You know, you'd have to shout to be heard. And also, have you been to, in Vienna, there's a place called Haus der Musik, which is really worth a trip if you guys, one of you's been there. And they have, the first thing you go into there is a mock-up of being in the womb. So they have all the sounds that you would hear, and they've been altered using DSP so that all the high frequencies are gone. You don't get high frequencies going through skin, so it's quite muffled. And yet you can hear people's voices quite clearly, which is how the baby knows its mother's voice, both through bone conduction and also from the outside, and its father's voice before it's born, and its language, research has shown. Babies react to the right language when they're born because they've heard it all around them through the skin. So, sound is there from the very beginning. In fact, roughly 12 weeks after conception, you start hearing. You have no ears then. You're hearing through everything else. Just as you are right now, you're still hearing through your skin, your bone, your muscle, all of it. The ears happen to be the specialists, but we do hear with all of us. So we're one big ear, effectively. And if you want proof of that, just think of Dame Evelyn Glennie, the famous percussionist, who has got no working ears at all. Her ears are dysfunctional completely. She's totally deaf in the ears, and yet she hears through the rest of her body. She's learned to hear that well just through skin, bone, and muscle conduction. Plays in bare feet as well. An amazing woman. Incidentally, if you want a great experience, you could buy yourself a Christmas present of her DVD, which is called Touch the Sound. And it's fantastic. It's really fantastic. So your ears are the specialists. They are amazing organs. You may or may not know that we hear roughly 10 octaves. So from 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, if we can hear really, really well. I mean, all of us heard that well once upon a time. Me, I'm a drummer. I don't hear that well anymore. I've lost everything above about 12,000 hertz. You can test yourself. There's apps you can get for your phones to test how high you can hear. It's probably less high than you think. But the ears, in theory, can hear 10 octaves. We see just 1 octave. My vision is a cone in front of me, so I'm directing it all the time. I know where I'm looking. Hearing, of course, is a sphere. We hear 360 degrees in a sphere all around us. I can hear what's going on behind me. I can't see what's going on behind me. And the hearing is also has a huge range of intensity. I mean, from the quietest sound you can hear to the loudest sound you can tolerate is something like 1 trillion times in terms of intensity increase. Much, much less intensity increase for the eyes. And of course, you have no earlids. Your ears are working all the time. Even when you're sleeping, your ears are working. If there's a strange sound in your house while you sleep, you wake up. Because that circuit is always running. Those little bones in your ear are going away thousands of times a second for years and years and years. It's a miracle of engineering when you think about it. Haven't got time to go too much into the ears, but I'm sure you've all studied them and they are amazing. However, there is a problem these days. The problem is, I think we're losing our listening, especially in the Western world. And I'm going to come back to this a little bit later on when I talk about listening towards the end. But I would like just to explore some of the reasons why we're losing our listening up front. The main one is just noise. I mean, we live in a world that is just bombarding us with images, with sounds, and it just is too much. And if you're in that kind of a situation, the reaction is to blot it out and to stop listening. It's just horrible, most of it. And noise, of course, largely noise like this, traffic noise, aircraft noise. Noise has a huge cost. If you want to check this out, the World Health Organization has a lot about noise on its website. And among the sounds, don't stand on ceremony, come down the front. There's seats in the front. No, he's going to sit at the back. Some of the more frightening statistics on the World Health Organization website include these. See if you can guess what that is. Anybody want to take a guess? It's the number of people in Europe whose sleep is being disturbed every night by noise above the World Health Organization recommended maximum. 125 million people are having their sleep disturbed every night. That's noise over 55 decibels at night time, which the WHO says is not good for you. Here's another one. That is the number of years of healthy living the WHO estimate are being lost in Europe alone to traffic noise alone. 1 million years are being lost every year of healthy living. And the cost in financial terms is absolutely huge. Something like 30, 40, 50 billion euros is a reasonable estimate, but I think it's probably far higher than that because they don't calculate the knock-on cost of, for example, somebody who's sleep deprived, who gets depressed or stressed, and then has an argument and kills somebody, or hurts somebody, or drives a car into another vehicle because they fall asleep at the wheel, or makes a huge mistake at work, which costs millions of pounds or euros to put right. Those kind of indirect effects are not calculated. It's a huge cost. And of course, a lot of us take refuge from this noise by trying to block it out. When you were little and you didn't want to hear something, what did you do? Exactly. And probably hum as well. These days, a lot of grown-ups do that. It just looks a bit cooler. So this is what we do to cut out all of that bombarding. The research shows that the main reason, actually, that many people use these, whether consciously or unconsciously, is to regain control, to establish personal space again, to stop the world from intruding, and to say, all right, I'm in control of my sound again. The trouble with headphones, well, actually, there are several troubles with headphones, and I'd like just to run through them with you, because you probably use them quite a lot. The first, and probably one that most people don't think about, is that we take a big social space like this, and we turn it into millions of little sound bubbles, where everybody's in a separate universe. And in that situation, nobody's listening to anybody. So listening declines, and we pay less attention. We get used to pretending people don't exist. I don't think that's particularly healthy. There's also what Murray Schafer called, you know Murray Schafer? Probably. Great book, Soundscape, The Tuning of the World. Get it, read it immediately. It's essential. He's a Canadian composer and author about sound, very old now. And he coined this phrase. He coined the word soundscape, by the way. He made that up. But he also coined the phrase schizophrenia, which is where there is a disconnect between what you see and what you hear. That hasn't happened for a long time. You know, all of our evolution has happened where we hear the sound of what's going on around us and what we're looking at. Not anymore. He talks about it starting with recorded music, where you're sitting in a living room and there isn't an orchestra in there with you. So you're hearing something that's not there. But headphones, of course, make that 50 times more powerful. So schizophrenia, I'm not sure that's good for us all the time either. Sometimes nice to have a soundtrack on while we're doing something, but if there's that divorce happening as a matter of course, does it not make us less present? There's a word in the UK, at least, for one of the biggest causes of accidents, road traffic accidents now. They're caused by people called pedestrians. So these are people who are walking around with the headphones in. They can't hear the car, they don't look, and they get hit. Or the car, 9 times out of 10, the car has to stop really fast and somebody hits it from behind. It's happening a lot. Another effect of headphones, that stands for noise-induced hearing loss. 1 in 8 American teenagers suffers from noise-induced hearing loss as a result of headphone abuse. You probably know this, and I'm sure you do, but if you don't, it is really dangerous to deliver 100 decibels into your ear canal for hours. That level of noise shouldn't be experienced for more than a few minutes a day, really. And yet there are millions of teenagers around the world sitting listening to that kind of level of sound for hours and hours a day. They are killing their hearing. And you know about hearing. Hearing is like an ice, a pond, and it gets eroded from underneath, and you don't notice it until you fall through, at which point it is too late, because you can never regenerate those hair cells in your ears. Once you lose your hearing, you lose your hearing. It is a precious gift, and we need to look after it. We've got some environments around us which are also creating this noise. I'll just mention a couple of them. Hospitals, for example, where they become impossibly loud places, and they're getting louder and louder all the time. And there are effects of this sound. I think we'd like there to be dispensing errors in a hospital, wouldn't we? And yet, if there is all this noise, the staff start to make mistakes. And how does anybody get well in a sound like this? This is just threatening. Really hard to sleep with this going on, really hard to get well with this going on. It's not the sound of health, is it? Hospitals are a big problem. And then education, of course. When I see a classroom designed like this, and there are classrooms that look like this in the world, I'm forced to ask an important question. I honestly don't think many architects do have ears. You know, in the UK, they train for 5 years. Any guesses how long they spend training on sound in that 5 years? Would anybody like to guess? Half an hour. Okay, that's the lowest guess I've ever had. It's a bit longer than that. Anybody else? All right, I'll tell you then. It is the grand total of 1 day in 5 years. 1 day. So it's not surprising they make things that look clean and beautiful and neat like this, and sound. Can you imagine what that room sounds like? The acoustics in there would be absolutely unbelievable. And the effect on our children in education is devastating, because The noise levels in classrooms these days are very, very high. That is the average sound pressure level measured in quite a big study in this country, in Germany, recently. Now, those of us who went to school in the old-fashioned way, where it was rows of desks and a teacher at the front, say, no, school was much quieter than that. Not anymore, because they use group work so much. So you have pods of children all talking at the same time with the teacher shouting over the top. That is the average noise level in these German classes. And the interesting thing about that noise level and about the way it varies is the sound pressure level is the black dots here. You can see them going up and down. The red dots are the teacher's heart rate. That is seriously concerning. So there's a stress reaction that happens to us. As noise gets louder, the heart rate goes up, the teacher's having to shout over the top of all of that noise. And that is seriously damaging to health. This is a big piece of research looking at all the health effects of noise. And what they say is 65 decibels is the level at which continued exposure puts you into danger of myocardial infarction. For those of us who are not doctors, that's a heart attack. So teachers may be shortening their lives by working in this environment. It's not healthy for any of us. And it's not very effective either. If you're sitting where this photograph was taken in row 4 of a traditional schoolroom, then a study in Florida found that you only get 50% of what's sent. Speech intelligibility at that level is 50%. Now, they have air conditioning and stuff going on. But over here, we also now have things like projectors and whiteboards and heating units and computer fans and so forth. So it is a really major issue. I'm going to jump over that sample because I don't have time to do it tonight. But if you liken education to watering a garden, which I think is a fair analogy, so I'm watering at the moment as hard as I can, and your lovely plants receiving it. Unfortunately, with rotten acoustics in many educational environments, we are wasting an awful lot of that water. It's not enough to send well. We have to ensure that we're received. And particularly for some acute groups. There are 4 I can think of. Those with impaired hearing, that's a big number, and it's not just the permanently hearing impaired, that's 2%. It's everybody, all the children who've got a cold, flu, glue ear, some sort of infection, whatever it might be. On any given day, roughly 1 in 8 children is having trouble hearing. Then you've got people who are studying in their second language. Right now, you're having to work much harder than normal to understand me, because you're translating at the same time as listening and criticizing. That's difficult. That's roughly 10% of a school population in the UK, and I'm sure it's similar here. There's a great TED talk by Susan Cain on the power of introverts. I do recommend that to you as well. And she showed that introverts are not fond of group work and loud environments. They don't perform well. They feel threatened. So they are also struggling in that. And finally, this I found out in Copenhagen only a few weeks ago, roughly 5% of the school population have some degree of ADHD. And for those people, noise, again, is very, very difficult to deal with. They don't respond well to it. Now, you put those numbers together. Some people have got more than one of these things going on, but that's a lot of people who are struggling to hear their education. I've just done a lot of work on this, actually, as you can probably tell, because I'm ranting about it, with the Swedish acoustics company Echofon, and we did a series of talks called Sound Education. If you're interested in this, do check out soundeducation.tv, and you can see the videos of all the talks from these events. And there was one in Munich, which was all in German, so you don't even have to translate it. Well, my bit was in English, but everybody else was speaking German. So I do recommend that to you. It's a very good program, and out of it came this app, which you can get on Android or iPhones, free. It's called Study, and it's designed to help you to work if you're in... I wouldn't play it that loud. If you're in a noisy environment, like you go home and you're trying to work in the kitchen and, you know, brothers and sisters are making a noise, you can put headphones on, put this on, and it helps to mask out the sound and help you to work. Let me just end this little section on sound, noise, ears, and so forth, and society, really, by giving you some tips for looking after your ears, how to love your ears, really. And these are important things, especially for people like you who actually, probably in your lives, are going to be using these as your greatest asset. I mean, these are what are going to make your career, your money will come from your ears, one way or another. First of all, I do recommend getting protection. Now, how many of you are drummers? Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you have got custom molded hearing protectors? All of you. Fantastic. That is brilliant. Well, I'm really impressed. So you know to go to an audiologist and they put stuff in your ear canals and they take molds and they make these silicone things which you can put in. They can have, these are monitors. So like many pro musicians use now, they have in-ear monitors. All Formula One drivers have them. I have a pair without the monitors which just take 15 decibels off everything. Flat, so I can hear everything perfectly, just quieter. Do you know I often wear them in London? Because the tube and the buses and the streets are so noisy, it's just lovely. Just keeps me, blissful. Just turning London down is very nice. So do get protection. If you can't afford these things, then even these are better than nothing. Secondly, if you're going to buy yourself headphones, then do buy the best you can afford. Because with quality, you don't need so much quantity. If you've got great headphones, then you can have them much lower and still get the same effect. So it really is worth spending the extra money. And finally, if you are in a city and somebody starts drilling next to you, I'm always amazed by the number of people who just stand there and shout. Well, that's fine. I do that a lot, actually, if I'm in that situation, or just walk away and leave it. But don't expose your ears to more noise than you have to. Here are some good sounds. See if you can guess what these letters stand for before we get to the end. Now, these are all stochastic sounds. Stochastic sound is composed of lots and lots of tiny events, randomly distributed, which, when you put them together, create a pleasing wash of sound. And we're very good at putting stochastic sound aside. And indeed, I think it's very healthy for us. Birdsong, wind, water, birds, those three, they're all things which, if you put them on in a pair of headphones, you can work no problem. You don't have to think about it. We've evolved to these sounds over hundreds of thousands of years. And indeed, I'll come back to birdsong a little bit later on again. So these are, I think, very healthy sounds. Unfortunately, we don't encounter them that often. When I go to New York, I look up and those walk, don't walk signs they have in New York. Quite often, if you look up, you'll see one little bird perched on the top of one of those, singing its heart out, trying to get over the top of 88 decibels of street noise, unsuccessfully, probably trying to find a mate. No chance. Sad. So we don't get a lot of that. Okay, so the summary is, of this introductory section really, the summary is most of the sound around us is accidental and a lot of it is unpleasant. So we stand on street corners shouting over noise like this and pretending that it doesn't exist. But it does, and it's having an effect on us. In fact, sound has effect on us in four major ways, which I'll cover with you in a moment. The other reasons why I think we've stopped listening are not so much about noise, they're about other things. First of all, we've found ways of recording stuff. So you don't have to listen to me that carefully. You know this is being filmed. If you fall asleep right now, I'm sure you can watch the video later. The premium on listening is not as high as it once was. There was a time when if you missed it, you missed it. All knowledge was handed down orally. Indian classical music, for example, is still that. There's not a note written of Indian classical music. None of it is written down. If you want to learn how to play the tabla, you sit at the feet of your guru and he says, it goes da 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 da. And you learn that. But that's not true of most things anymore. Secondly, we've lost patience. I love this cartoon. Sadly, I think it's rather true, this cartoon. So this is Abraham Lincoln and the reporters saying, now can we have it as a soundbite? So we don't want the hour-long speech anymore. We want just give me the top line, 3 seconds, and then I can get on to the next quick thing that I've got to do. So this impatience is there all the time. Then we've got desensitization. Now, I don't know the German media very well, and I don't know if you have the equivalent of what we call the red tops in the UK. These are the popular tabloid newspapers where, and again, I don't know about here, but in the UK, nobody can be mildly annoyed anymore. You've only got 2 states. You're either okay or you're furious. So whenever anybody's upset about anybody in the papers, it's always fury. It's ridiculous. And it takes away all of those intervening grades of emotion, the finer points of human emotion. And I think it also makes us less willing to listen to the small voices, the calm, the understated in the world. And then, of course, we've got technology. Now, I'm sure none of you have ever sent a text like this, have you? And I hope none of you have ever received a text like this. But they do get sent. This is not a conversation. This is part of what I call personal broadcasting, where it's just me putting out to the world things like Twitter, Facebook, and so forth. I'm not sure if I've got a slide about that later on. They are basically personal broadcasting. And again, they drive us to a world where we have a lot of shallow relationships which don't involve a lot of listening, instead of a few deep relationships where we truly listen to somebody else. So basically, most people, not you because you're specialists, most people have a relationship with sound which is a bit like this. And that is a bit of an issue. For those of us who care about it, it's a problem. And it's a problem for them as well, because what they don't know, what you may not know, is that sound affects all of us. So I'm just going to tell you the 4 powerful ways in which sound affects every human being. Now, that was quite gentle. That's a little shot of cortisol, your fight-flight hormone. I hope your alarm clock at home doesn't sound anything like that, because it wouldn't be very good for you if it did. Some people's do, amazingly. It's not good for you to have sudden noises like that. Your fight-flight hormone, if in overdose on a repeated basis, which happens in cities with lots of sudden noises, causes all sorts of health issues, gastric issues, sexual performance issues, depression, anxiety. There are all sorts of results of constant overdosing with cortisol. That's not the only kind of rhythm that's entrained by outside sound, though. Your heart rate, your breathing, even your brain waves. These are all changed by the sound around you. So if I were to put this sound on and leave it for the next few minutes, you'd all start chilling out pretty nicely. Your breathing would slow down. This is around 12 cycles per minute, which is about the same as the breathing of a sleeping human being. So it's a sound that most of us, it also sounds a bit like somebody being asleep, doesn't it? It's a sound that most of us also associate with being on a beach, being relaxed, no problem. So it's a relaxing sound, and it will reduce your heart rate and reduce your breathing. Let's move on to the second way in which sound affects us. So that was physiologically. The second way is psychologically. This piece of music is not going to make you feel happy. It wasn't designed to make you feel happy. We all know, and you particularly more than most, know that music is a very good conveyor of emotion. But it's not the only sound that conveys emotion. I said I'd mention birdsong again. Many people, we find birdsong deeply reassuring, because we have learned over hundreds of thousands of years that when the birds are singing, we're safe. It's only if something bad is about to happen that they will suddenly stop singing, and we get a little frisson, don't we, at that moment? It's an earthquake, there's a predator, something bad. So birdsong is a sound we use in the sound agency a great deal, actually. We deploy it in offices, for example, as masking sound, far nicer than pink noise or white noise, which is much beloved of architects and interior designers. I'm with Murray Schafer on that one as well. He says you can't hide a stink with perfume. And just in the same way, I think putting white noise into a space is not a particularly healthy solution to mask whatever else is going on in there. So birdsong, definitely good. Third way sound affects us is cognitive. You can't understand two people talking at the same time, or in this case, one person talking twice. Particularly if you're German and you're trying to listen to somebody who's English, that's very challenging. So what I just said, if you really didn't get it, is you can't understand two people talking at the same time. Even a woman cannot understand two people talking at the same time. I'm sorry, but it's true. We have bandwidth for roughly 1.6 human voices talking to us. So we've got massive storage in our brain, but the auditory bandwidth is quite small. And as a result, if you're working in a place that sounds like this, and you're trying to think and listen to the voice inside your head, and you can hear somebody else's voice talking next to you, they're taking up the one, you're left with the 0.6, because we have no earlids, because you can't shut them out, you can't stop listening to them, you can't stop hearing them. And when you're left with that 0.6, not surprisingly, your productivity is massively reduced. This is a number that, when I do this in business audiences, gets most of the audience nudging each other and going, I told you so, I told you so, except for the bosses, who look mildly confused, because they sit in their own little offices and they have no idea this is going on. There's a whole range of numbers on this. I mean, I've chosen the biggest one I've ever found, naturally, because I want to make the point, but they all show a drop. Anything from 5 to 66%, depending on what study you read. So it is very degrading to our productivity to be surrounded by noise, especially other people's conversation. It's the most distracting sound on the planet. If you're in that position, I recommend you wear headphones and play yourself birdsong, water, wind, one of those, or any combination of those, and you'll get all of that 66% back. And if somebody says, how dare you wear headphones, you can explain what you're doing to them and give them a little bit of education in sound. The fourth way sound affects us then is behaviorally. Of course it affects us behaviorally with all that other stuff going on. So ask yourself, is this person going to drive at a steady 35 kilometers an hour? I don't think so. Some of you may have experienced that little chain reaction of the music coming on and the foot going down on the accelerator. Likewise, the simplest way of putting this is that we tend to move away from unpleasant sound if we can. So if I were to put this sound on and leave it for the next hour or so, I don't think you'd be here. I wouldn't be here. If we can, we move away from noise like that. And I've already talked about the cost to society of people who can't get away from that kind of noise. Now, for retailers, which is a lot of what the sound agency does, this is really a major issue. Because most retailers have no idea how to make a nice soundscape for people. They're making all sorts of mistakes. They're creating terrible soundscapes, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And the effect on them is really, really bad. And they have no idea, most of them. So next time you go into a shop with terrible sound system, terrible acoustics, pumping music, which is completely inappropriate because you're trying to choose china or glass or something, then just feel sorry for the shopkeeper because they're losing a lot of money. The Elizabethans, I'll come back to silence. No, actually, I won't do silence now. I'll move on. This is another effect of sound in space on behavior. So I just want to show you this. Has anybody seen this little film? Okay, good. It was actually sponsored by Volkswagen, I think. And it was done in Sweden, and it shows the effect of a little piece of sound on people's behavior in a good way. So they actually, by putting that little sound in there, they had people going around finding litter to put into the bin. Is that desirable behavior? I think so. Completely the opposite to what most people do with litter. So we can make really big differences in people's behavior by just using sound in creative ways. And a lot of the time we're changing people's behavior in negative ways without thinking about it. This is the model we use at the Sound Agency when we're analyzing sound. We can run it in two ways. I'll just mention what it is. So that we have the outcomes. I've just mentioned those to you, the 4 outcomes of sound. And at the top, we have the drivers. If you break sound down, these are the basic building blocks: tempo, pitch, harmony, melody, texture, genre, whatever you want to put in that box. Density, how much attention is the sound calling? It's a very important aspect for us. And dynamics, how much does it change in lots of different ways? And in the middle, we have these 4 filters, which are really important to understand because they change everything. So you ask, what are people trying to do in the space? So, for example, it wouldn't be very productive to have pumping dance music in this room right now. You might like it better, but it wouldn't be very productive for what we're actually trying to do today. Secondly, the environment. So what's the acoustics of the space? What are the acoustics of the space like? How good is the sound system if there is one? Is there any intrusive noise from outside? These kind of things we need to consider before we can put sound in. There's no point trying to put great big powerful sound in on little tiny crappy 1-inch loudspeakers. Doesn't work. Often, this is a huge mistake people make with on-hold music. I mean, how many of us had sat listening to some, they put sort of Led Zeppelin or some huge symphonic piece of music through a loudspeaker that size in your head, in the handset. And not surprisingly, what you get is a load of distortion. Doesn't work. So environment is very important. Then the people, who are they? What do they like? What don't they like? What's going to move them? What's not? And finally, the brand or values behind the space. So we consider all those things. We can go 2 ways with this. One is we start with the outcomes. We say, how do you want people to feel? Then that's the kind of sound you need to make. That's design. Usually before that, actually, we go the other way. We say, this is the sound you're making, and this is the effect it's having. That's called an audit. And we do that in shopping malls, shops, and with businesses as a whole. Now, when I get to this point, I'm just going to now go into a little bit about brands and sound and the way businesses are using sound. I get to this point with brands, and they say, well, that's very interesting, so we'll do sound next year. To which I say, well, there's a slight problem with that, which is that you're doing sound already. Because they're all making sound, huge amounts of it, and they haven't planned it. And if you haven't planned the sound you're making, you haven't designed it, you're not conscious of it, it's a miracle if it's helping you, isn't it? Most likely, it's hurting you. And that is the truth for most of them. And this is against the noise I was talking about earlier in the world. Huge increase in the number of messages we're getting. We get messaged everywhere. In the street when we're walking around, get messaged in the gym. This one, I took this picture in Sao Paulo airport when I went there to do a talk a few years ago. And I was standing in the customs queue, waiting to give my passport in. And is this a video showing beautiful Brazilian beaches with some nice samba music? No, it's Yo MTV Raps. I mean, what? Unbelievable. So when I say we're getting messaged everywhere, transport literally everywhere, there's no escape anymore from being messaged, even in our most private moments. I know there's a toilet, I think it's in Japan, where they have screens on the floor in the cubicles. So, it really is pretty pervasive now. The marketing landscape, for any of you who are looking at careers in marketing or in business, the whole business landscape really has changed enormously. This is the old model over here, and we have moved, I think. It's true to say we have moved. We're not moving, we have moved to this new one. So instead of intruding on people with advertising, we have to ask their permission. Instead of overcoming their reluctance, like, you're bothering me, we have to engage people now. Instead of broadcasting our messages, we're in a conversation. It's no longer mass, it's personal. It has to be personalized to work. this is, social media has made all this happen in big ways. So the media have been replaced with contexts for a conversation. We don't sell now, we add value to things if we're smart about doing it. We don't make promises we can't keep. We deliver fantastic experiences in all the senses. So multi-sensory experiences. We don't have control over brands anymore. They're co-created. The moment we let a brand out there, all of us start to create what it is. And the brand's owners have lost control. And we've moved from a world of rationality to a world of emotionality, or at least the marketing profession understands now that we've always been like that. They used to think that the right way to appeal to us was to say, buy this because it's that much better and it costs this much less. No. You get us to buy things by appealing to the heart or the gut. This is an emotional process, and that's borne out by, just look at this. Emotional advertising is a huge study of lots of campaigns, is twice as effective as rational advertising. Now, why am I going on about this and talking about rational versus emotional, and the fact that if you think about the last big thing you bought, might be an expensive pair of shoes or something like that, a bike, whatever, I reckon that when you bought it, you were mainly down here in the emotional, non-conscious element. You may have come out of the shop and gone, yeah, that was a good thing to buy because. That's afterwards. The moment you buy it, you're going, I want it. And it's down here. Now, the reason I'm talking about this, of course, is because sound engages the emotions more powerfully than sight does, I believe. I think if you divide the senses into elements of conscious and non-conscious, you would have to agree that sight is largely conscious. As I said, I know where I'm looking. It's directed. I can close my eyes. Whereas sound is far more non-conscious, not altogether, but there's a lot of non-conscious in it, particularly since we've got used to ignoring, suppressing a lot of the sound we hear, and yet it's still affecting us. So I think sound and smell both have massive effect on our emotions, much more than sight. I'm going to step over this slide because it's a little bit more detailed than we need at the moment. And I'd like to introduce, has anybody come across what are called cross-modal effects? Excellent. Okay, so you're soundies, right? You like sound, you do music, and it's a passion for you. You need to know that the senses all affect each other. This is what cross-modal effects means. It means that the senses are intertwined. You can't deal with one on its own. Let me demonstrate this to you. This is called the McGurk effect. Has anybody come across it? One person, good. It should work on about 80% of you. What I would like you to do, please, is look at the screen and listen to what the guy is saying. So look at the screen.
Ba, 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 ba. Ba, ba.
Now, most people looking at the screen hear da, da, yes? Close your eyes.
Ba, 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 ba.
He's actually saying ba, ba. Some of you will have heard that. Most of you won't. The interesting thing is, now you know he's saying ba, ba. Open your eyes again and look at the screen.
Ba, 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 ba.
You cannot hear ba, ba when you're looking at the screen. He's actually saying ga, ga on the video. So your eyes see ga, ga, your ears hear ba, ba, and your brain says that's da, da. And you can't override that. No matter how often you try it, you can't override that. So what you hear, I just demonstrated to most of you, what you hear is not necessarily real. That's a bit spooky, isn't it? You're making it up. There's a lot of interpretation that goes on in creating the world around us. It's not reality, it's your reality. And it may not be right. Here's another one. This was done by Charles Spence. I was with him on Tuesday in Oxford. And he found that if you put headphones on people and have them eat crisps, and you boost the frequency 5 kilohertz, then they report that the crisps are 15% crunchier. Because they sound crunchier. You've got a bit more top end on it, you know? You're all mixing away. You know exactly how this works. Here's another one, a product that I'm sure all of you use. Not. This product, which is called Lynx in the UK, suffered when the law changed and they had to remove CFCs from their spray. So it started, it used to go, and then they took the CFCs out and it went, and the customers all said, it doesn't work in it. It's not working on me. It's not as effective as it used to be. It's weak. It doesn't work. And they stopped buying it. So they spent a lot of money and they repackaged it without CFC. So now it goes again and it's working just fine again. So the sound of the packaging affects how well people think the thing works. If you line these things up, which is a lot of what those of you who are in media studies and so forth, you're looking to do with vision and sound, and I'm sure you've come across the great book by Michel Chion on film sound about how sound in a film is 70% of the emotional impact, at least 70% of the emotional impact. Has anybody ever watched a great motion picture with just the location sound, without the music and the Foley and everything else? It's crap. I mean, any film you like, The Exorcist, Star Wars, whatever, rubbish, without the sound, really. So cross-modal effects affect you deeply, and if you line them up, you get this thing called superadditivity, where 1 + 1 is not 2. The latest neuro research shows that if you add to vision, if you add a congruent sound, you get an increase of 1,107% in the responsiveness of neurons to that stimulus. That's 12 times what you started with. On the other hand, if you add incongruent sound to the visual stimulus, your impact drops by 86%. So even worse than taking all the good sound off a film, if you put a load of incongruent sound on the film, it's a mess, isn't it? So this is worth knowing because what you're doing with sound is very powerful indeed. Unfortunately, in most of the world, everybody's obsessed with these. 83% of marketing money is spent on the eyes, and that's way out of proportion. Here's the 83%, that green bar. If you ask people which sense is most important to them in how they relate to the world, you get this blue bar picture, which is much more level, isn't it? So there's a huge opportunity, which is the one the sound agency is very interested in right here, in deploying sound effectively in marketing. That's what we do. You could say, yeah, what about smell? There's an even bigger gap here, but you can't say specific things with smell, and you can't broadcast it. So sound and sight are the two major senses. This is brand sound. This is the way we conceptualize it. We see 8 ways brands express themselves in sound, and I'd just like to trot through those 8 ways, and then I'm going to finish by talking about listening and give you some tools for improving your listening. So first of the 8, we've got product sound, like this. Now, not all products have this much invested in their sound. Actually, Harley-Davidson tried to trademark that a few years ago. They did not win the court battle because Yamaha have an engine that makes a similar sound, one. So, and it's a bit sad because that is a Harley-Davidson and they should own that sound. But there are plenty of other product sounds that have been trademarked. For example, Kellogg's have got a trademark crunch. And anybody who uses a proper computer knows that sound. If you're in an airport, you know when somebody fired up a Mac, right? Everybody does, because that sound hasn't changed for years and years and years, not much. Whereas Windows, for some reason or another, Microsoft decided to change the sound of Windows every time they release a new version of it. I have no idea why they do that. It's crazy. And expensive, by the way. So we've got the sound of using the product, like that. We've also got the name of the product. That's really significant and can really have big impacts in different countries. I think in this country you have, is it a drink or something called shit? Shit. There was a product in Germany, I remember this from a case study years ago, which didn't go down very well in the UK, surprisingly. Or Vauxhall launched a car in Spain, which in the UK is called the Nova, which means new and so forth. In Spanish, Nova means it doesn't go. Didn't work very well. So the name of the product can be very significant. Then you've got the packaging. I've shown you that with links. And finally, you've got the sound surrounding the product. Think of Bacardi, and you think of Latin music and club sound and people having a good time and so forth. So product sound, quite influential. Then you've got voice. Now, I'll mention voice to you in a little bit of detail because I think it's important. I don't mean metaphorically tone of voice. I mean literally voice. But the first time I got on a Virgin Atlantic aeroplane, the stewardess said, "Hello, sexy," which I remember very clearly because it's the only time anybody's ever said that to me. And also because it was surprising. Now, if she'd been working for British Airways, she would have been sacked for saying that. But working for Virgin, perfect. Cheeky, irreverent, surprising, informal, all of the brand values that Virgin had in 2 words. Amazing. And I don't think for a moment she was trained to say that. I think she understood the brand, and she knew she was allowed to play. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about with brand voice. Also, how old or young is the voice of the brand? Is it masculine or feminine? Does it have an accent? Does it speak fast and excited, or is it slow and laid back? Is it formal or cheeky? All of those things we need to define so that when we talk to people representing the brand, we have some consistency. It's important. And voice is so important. Let me just give you some examples.
To infinity and beyond.
I'll be back.
We cannot be serious! You big crap!
Bond. James Bond.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
And we are ready to lead once more.
May the force be with you.
That's a great montage that was put together by my colleague at the sound agency, Sid Wells, and it just shows the importance of voice. I mean, those are iconic sounds. But of course, many of you, most of you are musicians, yes? Well, even for the people out there who are not musicians in the way that we understand it, the voice is the instrument that we all play. No question. And yet, how many of us at school are trained how to use it? Was anybody actually given formal training in speaking at school? Anybody? It was ridiculous. We all have to do this. And is it important to speak powerfully in the world, to be heard, to be understood, to be able to get your point across, to express yourself? It's mildly important, isn't it? Voice is such a significant way of communicating, and we're getting seduced by text, by writing everything, now in 140 characters or less. But when you start to think about the difference between voice and text, voice has got so many advantages. It's natural, it's easy, it's rich. You've got intonation, threnody, as it's called, which tells you so much more than reading words on a piece of paper or on a screen. It's so much richer and more nuanced. And yet, we tend to get into the emailing, texting culture, and we tend to lose the idea of actually phoning somebody up. I'll just send them an email. Yeah, it's very sad, because the way you say something is more important than what you say. More important than what you say. I mean, just think of, have you ever said no when you mean yes? Like if somebody's tickling you or whatever. What a different no that is from the no you would say if a child steps out in front of a truck. Same word, 2 completely different emphases. We deliver so much more meaning with how we say things than what we say. And yet, what's the biggest fear that most people have? Worse than dying? Worse than Christmas? Anybody know? No, you haven't seen this research? The biggest fear for the vast majority of people is public speaking. You do anything to me, anything, don't put me up in front of a bunch of people to talk. That's how most people feel, which is very sad, I think. And certainly for those of us who ever have to persuade people or have to talk to more than about 2 people at once, even if you're only going to talk to one person, I really do recommend you take some action here. Even if, I mean, some of you may be singers already and may be doing this, but if you're cellists or pianists or bass guitar players or whatever it might be, don't forget the voice. Go and get some lessons. You may never be able to sing on stage, or you may never want to sing on stage, but you might discover you've got great talent. And whatever you do, you'll discover richness and an instrument that you can really start to employ and play with. Actually, you've been sitting there for a very long time, and it's about time I gave you a little bit of a state adjustment. So what we're going to do now, if you would like to join me, is some basic vocal warm-up exercises, which you can take away with you. And if you ever do have to do this, like stand up in front of 3 people, 10 people, 100 people, whatever it is, you can do these first. I do them every time before I speak, and they make a tremendous difference to your voice. So would you like just to all stand up for a moment? It's time we just got ourselves loose. And we're just going to do a few little exercises. So the first one, you can do it with arms if you like, but you're quite close together, so maybe not. We're just going to breathe and moan. So it goes like this. You guys go, like that. Very good. Now, did you feel your lungs opening there at the beginning? Just try it one more time. Deep breath in. Oh, and the diaphragm worked as well, didn't it? So that's a good start. Second, we're going to hum so loud it tickles. You can hold your fingers just under your cheekbone if you like here, and then we're just going to hum really loud. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And this one, we're going to get our lips working. So here you go, bop, 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 bop. That's great, because there's nothing worse than going to talk to people and it doesn't work very well. You need your lips in tip-top condition. Now we're going to do the tongue, so it's la 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 la. Absolutely. So your tongue also needs to be awake and alive when you're doing this. Now most of you can probably do this. I'm sure you can. So it's like a little bit of champagne on the tongue. That one really gets it buzzing. Now, you might want to apologize to the person in front of you or turn to the side for this one. This is not shh. We're going to say shh as loud as you possibly can and then breathe in. So it's breathe in first and then shh. You really push it out. Did you feel your diaphragm suddenly rise up when you did that? The harder you go shush, shh, the more your diaphragm comes up and you can really feel the bass of the whole vocal apparatus here. Let's try it one more time. Okay, that's enough spraying. Now we're going to let the lips come back into it, and we're just going to go. Fantastic. And now my absolute favorite, and if I can only do one before I go on stage, you'll hear me doing this as I walk down the street on my way to venues. People may think you're mad in the toilet, but it's essential. This one just expands your voice and gets the whole muscles going of your voice, the metaphorical muscles. We go from high to low. It goes wee, oh, wee, oh, wee. That is wonderful. Well done, everybody. Give yourselves a round of applause and take a seat. That last one is absolutely amazing, especially the bottom end. You suddenly find you've got more depth and more bass and more resonance, and you're in your chest instead of in your throat, which is where we all talk from most of the time in Europe. Try and get down here. It's really useful. By the way, if people find deeper voices generally more persuasive, there's evidence that people vote for politicians with deeper voices, for example. So if you want to be persuasive and carry some weight, And you might find that you normally talk up here and it's a little bit like this, and then if you move down here, suddenly people take you seriously. Think about it. It's a good thing to play with. Let's move on around that wheel and deal with telephone sound. I won't spend long on this. This is a disaster, an absolute disaster. I think more business is lost to this than any other factor in the world today. How? Press 1 for this, press 2 for that, press 3 if you're getting really irritated, press 4, oh, you've gone. How many of us have hung up on a system like that at some time in our lives? I mean, they're rubbish. They're designed by technical people, largely, and they put you into dead ends. They forget that older people, particularly, like to speak to a real person, and you don't get an option to do that in many of them. Really disastrous. So telephone sound really needs a lot of looking at. Music, right, your subject, is used by brands a great deal, and sometimes very well. If you've ever flown this airline, you'll know this piece of music. So this is the Flower Duet from Lakme, an opera by Delibes. And British Airways have been using that piece of music for a very, very long time, and it's very identified with them. But a few years ago, they sacked their advertising agency, M&C Saatchi, and replaced them with an American agency called BBDO, who said, let's get rid of that old classical stuff. It's old. Let's do something new and vibrant. So they replaced it with this.
I believe your holiday should start before you arrive. You're our guest. You should expect to check in online.
So that's a song called Leaving on a Jet Plane, which sounds like a good idea until you know that the second line of that song goes, don't know when I'll be back again, which might not be the best message to give business travelers or their families, perhaps. The song was written by John Denver, who died in a plane crash. Wasn't the best choice ever. And actually, when they did that, there was a massive rebellion. Thousands and thousands of complaints came in from British Airways customers saying, where's our lovely classical music? Because British Airways had a sonic asset, a sound asset, and they didn't know. They had no idea. They were just chucking it out. They didn't know that everybody identified it with their brand. There are plenty of brands in that situation. Just on the subject of music, actually, overall, music is the second most powerful sound on the planet, I think, after the human voice. To us, music is immensely powerful. Sometimes it can be more powerful than the voice, and of course, many times it includes the human voice as well. Why is it so powerful? I think two big reasons. First of all, we recognize it very fast, and secondly, we associate it very quickly with things. So, I don't know if you're going to be old enough to recognize this piece of music. I did this to a bunch of students in Turkey not so long ago, and I got blank looks all round, but you are musicians, so there's a good chance. See if you recognize. Yes, thank you. Well, one or two of you got it. Yes, Hard Day's Night by the Beatles. And that's like 1 second of music. I'm sure you will all associate this next 1 second of music with something. So it doesn't take long for music to work its magic on us. Music is very powerful. And you know what they say in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. I hate to see music being deployed as a veneer. You know, I haven't been in many recording studios over the years where people are hunched over a mixing desk at 3 a.m. going, let's make something that nobody wants to listen to. The intention of music is to be listened to. And therefore, if you put music into a place where people are trying not to listen to it because they're trying to concentrate on something else, you have a conflict of interest. The music wants to be listened to, I don't want to listen to it, conflict. Doesn't work. And there are many, many, many situations where that is true, especially in retail. So we have an issue with music, and I'll come back onto that, I think, in a few moments when I talk about generative sound. Let's move on. Sonic logos. You might have heard this one. Might ring a bell. That's quite famous. Let me talk about another one, actually, which is a client of ours who've been having a tough time of late, but hopefully with this, they're on the way back. Has anybody got a Lumia? Oh dear, maybe they're not on the way back after all. You may not recognize this piece of music, but you will in a moment. about here. Might ring a bell, turned into this. Which is the world's most played tune? I've calculated this with Nokia. It's played something in the region of 1.8 billion times a day. Comes out of a handset somewhere on the planet. It knocks Happy Birthday and anything else you can think of absolutely out of the park. And it's had a great effect on Nokia's recognition. They are aware they have to keep it changing. And actually, they've just done something really interesting, which is to crowdsource it. So in India and in China, they put it out for a competition, and local composers created versions of it, and the winner got $10,000, and the tune went on the handset in that arrangement. So they're starting to crowdsource their sonic logo. Advertising sound. I don't have too much to say about it because generally the advertising industry have learned a lot from the film industry and now the gaming industry on how to use sound well with picture. And they do it quite well. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's done at the last minute, and you get some poor composer gets a call saying, we'd like the theme from Rambo, but sensitive, and can we have it tomorrow afternoon? And can you make it cold? And you just, what? So it does tend to get sometimes treated like that. But if I just give you one example. Oh yeah, he's been doing that for a long time. That's just to say it's been around for a very long time, 60, 70, 80 years. There have been 6 Tonys so far. They die off and they get replaced every so often. Do you have Tony the Tiger here with Frosties? Yeah, so good. He's not in every country, I've discovered. That's interesting. But I'm going to play you an ad where I'd like you to listen to the sound on this ad. This is my favorite ad of all time. It's not a perfect copy, I'm afraid. The sound isn't perfect. Just be patient with that, but listen.
He waits. That's what he does. And I tell you what, tick followed talk, followed tick, followed talk, followed tick. Ahab says, I don't care who you are, here's to your dream. The old sailors return to the bar. Here's to you, Ahab. And the fat drummer hit the beat with all his heart. Here's to waiting.
Now, I don't know about you, but I get goosebumps every single time I play that piece of film. I think that's the most incredible piece of sound design. The silence. How many people heard him put the glass down on the bar? I did say listen. Halfway through that, he goes, clunk, with a pint of Guinness. It's in there. Brilliant sound design. Great music selection, piece of music called Fat Planet by Left Field. And just really well crafted all the way through. So they can do it extremely well. That's won all sorts of awards, that ad. Let's move on to the last couple of items. Branded audio used to look like this. It was a question of putting your brand on a CD and sending it out to people. So, I mean, creating some nice audio that's got a brand on it and you give it to people with your compliments. These people have all made far more money out of CDs than they have out of being a bar or a hotel, I can assure you. Tens of millions of CDs they've sold. Now it looks like this. It's a lot cheaper. And it sounds a bit like this.
This is Alberto Salazar.
Thank you, running coach. This 30-minute workout includes hill repeats to improve your running fitness and leg strength,
So it will feel easy.
So Nike give you that and you feel good about it. You put it on your iPod, you do your workout with a world champion helping you. Great. It's free, it's excellent, it's quite cheap for them to do as well. And I think this is a big area, one which many of you may end up working in, I'm sure, as we start to use audio in more interesting ways as downloads for people who have a particular interest or a particular relationship with a brand. But there is this fusion going on. Like, where does my 18-year-old son go if he wants to listen to music? Anybody? On the internet, where does he go? Yes, thank you. He does. And I'm sure you do, a lot of you as well. That's a video medium, isn't it? Not for a lot of people, it isn't. It's where many, many, many millions of people go to listen to music. And there's a whole bunch of fusion going on in this space. You may have come across some of these services. I mean, I'm sure many of you use SoundCloud, and Mixcloud, its relatively recent close cousin. Have you come across Audio Boo? Check it out. It's democratizing the spoken word. It's kind of like having your own personal radio station. Twitter in sound. You record little snippets of sound. You have a channel. People can follow you. You can follow other people. You can tag them. It's really nice. So there's a lot of stuff happening in this space. And then we've got all of these music playing services, some of which claim to be radio. I've been doing a lot of talking to the radio industry recently. And I think they're slightly concerned about machine music like this, algorithmically chosen streams of music claiming to be radio. It's not quite the same thing, is it? So, interesting area to watch, this fusion. Then we've got the web, of course. I think if you divide the world into content that's passive, old style, content that's interactive, content that's static, like words and pictures don't move, video and audio do. And then you've got fixed content where you have to go somewhere to look at it or engage with it, versus mobile content. There is no doubt that the action is all going to be happening in this quadrant up here. And I'm sure many of you are already focusing all your attention in that area. Let's end this little tour of brand sound with just a conversation about soundscapes, because it's my personal passion. It's what I do a lot of the time. Most retail sound is arbitrary. Nobody designed it. It's incongruent, doesn't fit with the brand, and it's downright hostile, leaves us feeling like this and wanting to run out of a shop. Even if we never complain about it, we just leave. Here's some examples. This is shelf stackers dropping trays behind shoppers in a big supermarket, so you get this noise behind you. What's that? This one I don't even have to introduce. We've all met these, and they just go on screaming like this until they die in a corner somewhere. Sad little things. Nobody takes them away and makes them better. And then we've got chiller cabinets, which is so pervasive. This was 80 decibels at 1 meter. You stand in between two of these, it's like being in a factory, not a shop. And they're all around us. And they make a huge deal of noise, pervading a whole space. And then we've got rubbish music through rubbish loudspeakers. This isn't tweaked. This really did sound like this. And who thinks that's a pleasant place to shop in that noise? And then you have open doors, hard surfaces everywhere, announcements coming over PA systems. It's a real mess. Just give you a couple of examples of how powerful the effects are of sound on human beings. This was one where they tested music conditions on people's buying. So they had French and German wines at the end of a gondola in a supermarket. Absolutely identical, no change between them. You couldn't tell the difference in the displays. And what they did was alternate a bit of French music. That was one day, and then the other day they had no, sorry about this. Your national music there. Do you know, the funny thing is, every time I play that sample of, that's Bavarian music, isn't it, I think? Every time I play that sample of music, everybody laughs. It's a very happy piece of music. It makes people happy. I think it's good. Anyway, what happened? So on the French music days, French wine outsold the German wine by 5 bottles to 1. But on the German music days, German wine outsold French wine by 2 bottles to 1. Now that is interesting. And if you'd said to the people leaving that store, did you buy that bottle of German wine because of the music playing, they would have said, what music? Non-conscious, suppressed, emotional impact, changes our behavior, and they're not even thinking about it. Now, if that kind of effect is going on, just think how bad the effect is of most retail sound on what we do. I mean, like, do you want to hang out in your local supermarket? Doesn't look awful, doesn't smell awful, sounds dreadful. All those beeps and hums and buzzes and oh. Here's an example of some of the stuff that we've done. Glasgow Airport. Our brief was to reduce stress So we created this generative soundscape. Now you're all listening in a slightly different way to earlier on. You can hear the elements here. Birdsong, security. Also mental alertness. When the birds are singing, it's time to be awake. Very, very slow tempo. Slowing people down through entrainment. Lovely, drifting, positive, harmonic relationships. Nothing horrible going on there. And just calming, basically. And the effect on people was really good. They liked it, those who noticed it. It was played quite quietly. And the airport were pretty happy too, because what happened was sales in the shops went up by between 3 and 10%. We weren't even playing in the shops. Now, this is good because it shows that carefully designed sound actually makes people feel more comfortable. And if the retailers make more money that way, we give them a reason to do this. Good sound is good business, fortunately. And this is my passion because I want to stop them from making horrible noise. So if we show them that they can make profit by making good sound, hooray, everybody wins. Let me show you the Harrods case study. This is what just won the award on Tuesday.
Roll up, boys and girls, mums and dads.
So it's the new toy kingdom. You come into this circus area, and we have generative circus sound.
The circus.
Complete with clowns and seals and all sorts of things going on. Then you move into the enchanted forest, where you have this generative forest soundscape with fairies and magical little sounds and birds, wind through leaves, all those kind of sounds. The fairy is in the flower pot. So the children get to hear the fairy interfacing with them from the flower pot. Then you go through further into Wonderland, and here we've created a generative orchestral soundscape. It's a little bit like a John Williams theme film score to E.T. or something like that, you know, a magical Disney-type, Spielberg-type film. And in the middle of the department, and this is all generative sound, okay? And if anybody doesn't understand that, I'll explain more in a moment. In the middle of the department, you've got a car display and a train display over here. So out of these islands, we have car and train sounds coming, of course, to add to the excitement. They're only audible locally. Then you move through to this burning planet coming through a wall. It's a great visual display, and we've got low-frequency sound delivered by subwoofers and also surface transducers, which are vibrating the whole place, so it's all rumbling there. And you come through into the space toy department, Odyssey. So we've designed another generative soundscape here. It's a little bit like being on the bridge of a starship or something like that. And finally, you move through to the reading room, where there's a mural around the walls of different scenes from children's books. And each scene, we have a generative soundscape, and they rotate around. So this one is medieval knights and so forth. I won't go on. You get the idea. It's a long way from kiddie pop music, which is what they would have been playing before. It's an experience. It's a curated, sound-designed experience. And I believe this is the future of retail. What we always say to people is that. And so many shops, you can't. So many shops just sound the same, bit of lounge music. It's really tragic. We need to move architects away from designing appearance to designing experience. That's what we need. And there are a few starting to do it now. My last TED Talk was about this, and I've had lots of nice architects talking to me saying either thanks for raising it or yes, we are starting to move in the direction of experience. Here's how you do it with sound in a space. We always start with a foundation of good acoustics. It's essential. You can't put great sound into a lousy room and expect it to work. Then we look at the noise sources in the room or the space. Then we advise on a good quality sound system, but only then do we start to get into what content shall we make. So doing this without any of this is like putting icing on mud. It may look like a cake, doesn't taste like one. So that's a little whiz around brand sound. I'll just give you the 4 rules that we give to our clients: congruent, appropriate, valuable, and testing. That's what we work them through. And the process that we go through with them typically starts with a workshop. Actually, these days, we typically start with an audit now, and then we do the workshop immediately afterwards. So we're auditing Harrods, for example, took 2 teams of 2 people 5 days. It's a huge store, 300 departments. Took us a long time. And when we audit, we record 30-second sections of sound. We take a sound pressure level measure. It is dB, LA, EQ, 10 seconds. And we then take a photograph of the space and qualitatively record our observations. And then we give them a report of every one of those sets of readings, sometimes hundreds of those. So we do a workshop to do the brand, we do a big report, and then we create guidelines for them. Then, and only then, do we start to get into what do you want. So we're not interested in the conversation where somebody phones up and says, can I have a bing bong, please? That's not what we do. And we try and educate people that that's not the right approach. Then we deploy it, and finally we keep it fresh and developing. So let me end with the last section, which is just going back to listening. This is such an important skill for you. Now, you're lucky because you're all musicians, I think, and musicians, by definition, listen more than anybody else. That's why I got into doing what I do. Because if you're a drummer sitting at the back of a band, and, you know, the drummer does make the band work, guys. You know, if those of you who are not, you drummers, am I right? Yeah. So you're kind of controlling the band with these invisible power lines that you have to all the other musicians. You have to be listening. You really have to listen. Because if you're not listening to what other people are doing, you're not responding with those little micro ways you do when you're playing with other musicians, it doesn't work. So you already are way ahead of other people. But nevertheless, this is happening in the world. What is listening? Well, we spend a lot of time listening. You speak, listen, read, and write. Roughly 60% of that communication time, listening. And yet you retain only about 25% of what you hear. Not very good. Now, I'm sure you've got much more out of today than 25%. Nevertheless, that's pretty much what we do on average. What I mean by listening, a simple definition, making meaning from sound. So it's a mental process, happens after hearing. It's the interpretation. And as we've already shown, that is somewhat variable. We do this through a number of techniques. There's pattern recognition. And if I'm in a party sounding like this, I struggle these days to distinguish signal from noise. You will find that as you get older. But if somebody says your name, you immediately recognize that pattern. So we do a lot of our listening through pattern recognition. Then there's differencing. And this is some pink noise. And if I were to leave this pink noise on for 5 minutes, you would actually cease to hear it. Again, you probably all know this. You just discount it. If it doesn't change, your brain says, I'm not listening to that. Although I do think there's a little bit of effort involved in something in your brain going, I'm still not listening to that. I'm definitely not listening to that. All day, that's tiring. Then there are filters. Now, this is so important in the study of listening to understand that we all have individual listening. I mean, it's a vital element in human communication to understand that the person you're talking to does not listen the way you do. That's crucial, because these filters are set differently for all of us. So we're all brought up differently. You may have the same culture, but many of you are from different parts of Germany, so you probably have very different cultural backgrounds. You may have the same language. Well, same thing applies. Dialect, different styles of speaking, and obviously different nations have hugely different interpretations. There are some languages on the planet which have no word for time. There's no tomorrow, yesterday. It's all now. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Values, so this starts to be you individually, how you were brought up, who taught you, what you believe in, what you've decided you believe in, what your attitudes are day to day, to the news, to other people, to types of people, bigotry, prejudices, preconditions, all these kind of things. And then What are your expectations in this situation you're in now? And what are your intentions? They will deliver a different listening. All of that delivers a different listening. Your listening changes over time, and it's definitely not the same as other people's. Sadly, I agree with Ernest Hemingway, most people simply don't listen. So I'm going to end with 5 exercises for you. Simple exercises you can take away that will improve your conscious listening. Is that all right? Good. And then I'm happy to have any questions. First exercise is this. Now, of course, that's not quite silence, is it? Because we have a lovely fan in our midst. It's pretty hard to get real silence these days. And it's important to try to get something close to it for a few minutes a day. Silence is a great resetter. It resets your ears, recalibrates them. It's like a sorbet in a heavy meal or something. If you can just get away from the noise and get into a quiet place for a little bit. The Elizabethans in the UK used to describe conversation as decorated silence. Now, when you're making sound in your lives, I really suggest you remember those 2 words and think about how you are decorating the silence. It's a beautiful concept. And if you can't decorate it, silence is fine. So that's the first exercise, a few minutes of silence a day. Second one is what I call the mixer. Now, most of you are familiar with a mixing desk. So if you're in a place like this, you can start to say, how many channels of sound am I listening to? How many individual signals? Where are they coming from? How are they, where are they panned? You just start to think about the individual components of the stuff that's around you. Or you can do it in a beautiful place like this. How many birds can I hear? Where are they? How are they singing? Where are the waves coming from? All that kind of stuff. Second exercise, the mixer. It makes you much more acute in your listening to just, the general stuff that's around you. Third exercise, I call this savoring, like this guy is with his cup of coffee. This is listening for the hidden choir in the sounds around you, which may be very ordinary sounds. So I did this a while back with an orchestra in America, because I had noticed that my tumble dryer is a waltz. And I think I've got the full sample on here. So here's my tumble dryer. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. No, I haven't got the full sample on here. And they took that and put a nonette over it playing a waltz. It was absolutely beautiful. And since then, if I turn my tumble dryer on, it makes me smile because I remember the waltz that they played over the top. It's not a bad sound at all. You can get very close to some pretty ordinary sounds, and they start to deliver this amazing technicolor effect. I mean, listen to this one. And that's really quite impressive. If you put your ear close to a kettle, not the spout, but lower down, because you'd hurt yourself that way, that's what you'll get. There's a lot of sounds around us that are amazing if you just listen for the choir. So you can savor sounds around you. Fourth exercise is probably the most significant of all of them, actually, is listening positions. I don't mean physical position. It's metaphorical. Imagine there's a house on a hill. If you don't like the way the house looks, you can get up and walk around the other side of the hill and see if it looks nicer from the other side. Now, that's a good metaphor for the way listening works. Most people have learned to listen in one way. All those filters that they're not conscious of are set one way, and they're in effectively a bunker at the bottom of the hill. They've got one way of listening to the world, and that's it. Doesn't have to be that way. If you start to play with those filters, then you can change your listening position, and it can be really powerful to do that. Let me give you examples of 3 scales of listening position. There are many, many. You can make up your own. It's not exhaustive. I don't pretend to be, the author of all listening positions, but these are 3 interesting examples. So first of all, active to passive. Active listening would be the kind of listening that a therapist does which typically will involve using words like, what I hear you say is. What you just said to me is. So it leaves the other person feeling heard. It's a pretty good technique in parenting, and I think most of you are far too young to have children, or certainly teenage children, but if you say to your teenage child, what I hear you say is, you hate me and you want to kill me, then they feel suddenly heard. And it's a different outcome to the normal conversation that's had at that point. So it can have a radically different outcome. Passive listening, on the other hand, is like a Zen master sitting by a stream, just listening to the sound. No interpretation, nothing going on at all. So that's active to passive. This one is a bit of a gender stereotype, I know, and yet I think there's more than a grain of truth in it. So I'll give it to you anyway. So just bear in mind it's probably a little bit stereotyped. Men tend to listen in a way that I call reductive. In other words, for a point. Like there's a point here, there's something to solve, there's a destination, and we're going there. And let's get there as effectively and quickly as possible. Tend to listen in that way. So a typical male conversation would go something along the lines of, I've got this problem, here's the solution, thanks, in a nutshell. Move on to the next thing. And always walking side by side, looking off into the distance. Women, on the other hand, tend to listen in more of an expansive mode, which is to say there is no point. It's not about a point. It's about listening and being with the other person and enjoying the journey and, just being on that journey with them. The destination is not so important. And they tend to do that looking at each other, facing each other. It's a very different form of communication and a different form of listening. So you get clashes between those two. Like, she comes home and says, I've had a dreadful day. This happened, that happened, this happened. And he says, have a bath, you'll be fine. Well, in the male world, that's a good solution. Done and dusted, back to watching the football. But it wasn't quite what she had in mind for that conversation. So this kind of mismatch of listening styles can be quite destructive in relationships. And it's a good thing to start playing with listening in different modes. So as I say, gender stereotype, but probably a grain of truth. Then critical to empathetic is another good spectrum. Critical listening is what you've been doing to me since I started. I've nearly finished, so you can stop in a moment. But it's that little voice in your head that's been going, I don't agree with that. Where did he get that from? That's interesting. That little voice. The little voice that just said, what little voice is he talking about? That little voice. That's your critical voice, your editor. And it's how we listen most of the time, actually. Very productive in business, most business conversations. But sometimes it doesn't work so well. Empathetic listening, on the other hand, way at the other end of the scale, is going on to the other person's island. It's actually feeling their feelings. And the output from empathetic listening is the other person feels understood. Not just heard, but understood. And there's generally three things, I think, in human relationships that people want: to be heard, understood, and valued. So empathetic listening can be quite powerful in achieving two of those at once. So those are just some ideas about listening positions. Listening is a form of presence. It's a form of consciousness. And practiced properly, conscious listening can transform our relationships. I'll just give you the fifth and final tool to use in doing that. And this is for conversation with other human beings. I call it rasa. And if you're in any of these roles, which I imagine we all are, it's quite effective. Rasa is the Sanskrit word for juice. But in this context, it stands for receive, appreciate, summarize, ask. So as I always say to my teenage children, listening involves receiving, setting yourself to receive. That's looking at the person who's talking to you, not listening like this, which doesn't feel like you're being listened to if you're speaking into that. So eye contact, body language, and so forth. You all know this stuff, leaning forward if you're sitting down, all those kind of things. That's receiving. Appreciating little noises like, oh, really? I always forget these things when I'm on the telephone. So people are talking away, I'm listening intently, and they say, are you still there? because I haven't said anything for ages. So it's important to oil the conversation with these little words. So, summarize. So, a really important word, so. If you're a so person, you can parcel up big chunks of conversation in the meeting and put them over there and move the whole meeting on to the next thing. So, what we're all saying is this. Okay, let's move on to that one then. So is a really powerful word, and it makes people feel that you've understood a whole parcel of conversation. Very, very important. And finally, ask. Obviously, ask throughout, ask at the end. It shows you've been listening. That's why I'm very happy if you ask questions at the end, because I believe then you're interested and engaged. So listening, what is it then? Well, listening is the doorway to understanding. It's an important part of being present in the world. You know better than most people, listening places us in space. I mean, I can close my eyes in this room, and even if I didn't know what it looked like, I would have a pretty good idea of how big it is and how far I'm standing from walls. That can be developed, that skill. You know, there's an American boy who's blind and who rides a bike navigating by clicking using echolocation. So the skill can be developed quite acutely, but we all have it. Listening places us in space. Listening also places us in time. Hermann Hesse said, music is time made aesthetically perceptible. That's an interesting take on it, isn't it? Jean-Luc Nancy went further than that and said, sonority is time and meaning. French philosopher. All sound has got time embedded in it. There is no such thing as an oral photograph. A moment of sound means nothing. You understand what I'm saying now because you remember what I just said. Not much has changed since I stood up here an hour and a half ago. Visually, you all look the same. I look the same. If you took a picture now, you wouldn't know whether this is minute 10, minute 20, or minute 90. But the flow of time has been passed through sound. In fact, I would suggest that sound is the main way in which we experience the passage of time in our lives. Largely through conversation, but other things too. And then, so listening places us in space. Listening places us in time, and if you have a spiritual dimension to your life, you'll know that most spiritual paths also talk about listening and contemplation as an important part of listening, placing us in any spiritual dimension we have. So it's a major thing to listen. It's a major thing, major part of being conscious, and that's why I think it's so important that we defend it. And in fact, I'd love to inspire you to evangelize it, to promote it, to help your friends to listen, and to inspire them with the importance of doing it. So, what I'm trying to get to in the world is a world that sounds beautiful, and fortunately, when we're talking to business, we can say that good sound is good business. But to get a world that sounds beautiful, we have to have two things. First of all, we have to have conscious listening from everybody, so we complain about bad sound. Secondly, we have to have conscious creating of sound. And you put those two things together, then hopefully we end with a world that sounds beautiful. I would really like to thank you for your long attention. I don't normally do 90 minutes at a stretch. You've had lots of content, and you're all still awake, so I'm very impressed. Thank you for your attention. It's been a delight to be with you tonight. Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. So would anybody like to ask anything at all? Don't be shy. It's your one shot. Don't be going home thinking, oh, I wish I'd asked that. Yes, please. This is where your fear of public speaking has to be.
Okay, I have two short questions. The first one was, why is non-conscious trademark word? Maybe.
Okay. Well, that came out of, we were looking for a word that was not unconscious, is when somebody's hit you, right? It's out to the world. Subconscious has got Freudian overtones, and it's associated with psychiatric models. So we created the word non-conscious to specifically to talk about things which go on that you're just not conscious of. You're not out, you're not in your, it's not about subconscious, superconscious, or any of those things. It's just about that you don't notice them. The TM actually was done by Brand Sense Agency, with whom I work a great deal. So I'm kind of paying respect to them. It's not a TM of the sound agency. And of course, TM only means we're claiming that this is a trademark, but we haven't registered it yet. So it's not R. R in a little circle, that's rather more serious. I hope that answers that one. So I wouldn't take that too seriously overall.
I was just wondering, what are your experiences or your ideas about spatial audio, binaural technologies, or sometimes you call it 3D audio? Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, in two ways, yes, we do. First of all, when we do our audits, we have traditionally recorded them binaurally. We have created a pair of headphones with microphones at the points of the ears. So we look like we're walking around listening to headphones on a small device, but actually we're doing binaural recordings on a small device. So it's very unobtrusive. More lately, we've gone to recording in surround sound using a Zoom or a similar handheld device, just because of ease, really. But both methods are very good at reproducing. If we put the headphones on the client, they really get a good sense of what's going on. So in terms of recording, we love binaural. In terms of installations, we haven't had the opportunity yet, I don't think, to install a 3D sound setup. I know very well a guy called Charlie Morrow. Don't know if any of you have come across Charlie Morrow, but he's the inventor of a thing called the Morrow Sound Cube. And he's got, I think he's trademarked 3D sound in some way, shape, or form. He's done massive installations in cities and in big buildings using a 9.1 grid. So you've got, is it 9.1? So you've got a cube of loudspeakers, which would be 8, so it's 8.1, which is, so you've got forward, back, left, right, but also up, down, and a subwoofer. And if he's got to go into a big space, he just puts more layers on, so it ends up being 12, 16, 24, whatever it is. And he can do some amazing things with, you know, virtually have a mosquito fly around your head in the space. We haven't used that very much. What we do use a great deal is directional loudspeakers, like hypersonics, sound showers, things like that. So we can create pools of sound. We also use surface transducers a lot, which bolt onto a hard surface like a table or a window and turn the whole thing into a loudspeaker by vibrating the whole rigid membrane. And they can be very nice at producing a lovely diffuse sound field in a space where you can't see anything. You know, you could have one under the floor here, and you'd have lovely sound coming from the floor, and you wouldn't know how. So that can be quite magical.
Especially for, like, you've shown the parts of the shop, and then you need directional audio for each part of it.
Yeah, because otherwise you overspill into all sorts of different areas. And of course, generative sound is the thing we love the most of all the technologies available. We've created a system called the Amplifier. It's a Linux-based PC with a player software on it that when we give it a patch of instructions based on probabilities and a whole load of sounds to play, it starts to create. It plays live, and it's organic, and it changes and evolves. It doesn't repeat itself. It's not recorded. And it can create lovely soundscapes. That they're oral wallpaper. It's something in between silence and music, which is designed not to be listened to, unlike music. You know, I was saying music is, the problem is it's designed to be listened to. The stuff we produce with these soundscapes is designed not to be listened to. It's designed to be lovely in the background. Just like you don't come in here and go, look at those white walls. They're just here, they support. And that's, I think, an important class of sound, which has really hardly ever been done. I mean, I know, Eno invented the term ambient music when he was lying in the hospital bed and could only just hear the radio and so forth. So he realized there is this gap in between listening to something and silence. There's not listening, but having it there. And at the moment, we're ramming music into that gap, and that's wrong. It should be something else, and that's what we're exploring with the amplifier system. So thank you for your question. I hope that answered it. Or 2 questions, indeed. Anybody? Oh, yes, another one. Great. Coming thick and fast now.
Hi.
Hi.
Might it be a problem for you that rich companies can manipulate the behavior of people with the power of sound in a moral way, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And ecology is an extremely important part of life, really, isn't it? I mean, as a human being, it's important that we have an ecological aspect to our life, that we think about our effect on other people. Because we all manipulate people. We all do stuff that affects other people. And sometimes it's in our own interest and we're trying to, get them to do something, and sometimes it's overt. So, at an individual scale, I think ecology is important. At a corporate scale, it's really important. We won't work for tobacco companies, alcohol companies. Well, that one's up for debate. But drug companies, we won't work for them either, just because there's my personal beliefs, right? So it's my company. I don't have to work for people I don't want to work for. I think that there is no evidence I've ever seen to support the premise that subliminal sound can manipulate people's behavior. I've never seen that. There was one very shabby study in a cinema with very short bursts of sound that nobody was able to replicate, and I don't think it's very credible. So I tend to think that the most basic effect is whether you create pleasant sound or unpleasant sound. You could argue that wine study I showed was manipulating people.
Because they don't have control about...
But do they? I mean, are you making them buy a bottle of wine because there's German music on? I think what you're probably doing is creating conditions which are conducive to people feeling good about a thing. Well, that's what advertising does. So, you'd have to say, there's a bigger debate here. Do you believe in capitalism? Do you believe in marketing? Do you believe in advertising? And where does it stop? So we have laws about these things in order to clarify those boundaries. I would certainly never indulge in anything which I felt was manipulating people. At the moment, I'm happy to say, unless you think Harrod's Toy Kingdom is manipulating people, I think we're just creating a beautiful, fun environment for people. At the moment, I think a lot of what we do, if this was a conversation about smell, most of what we do is removing stink. Now, that's not manipulative, that's just sort of sensible. Like, you wouldn't walk into you wouldn't want a meeting room where you're going to have a conversation to have every inch of the wall plastered with garish colors or grandmaster paintings or something. You have white walls, just common sense. And I think at the moment we're a very long way from common sense in the way we design sound for our spaces. So I would like to see us move to, once we get to neutral, then we can start to worry about, are we manipulating people? I think what will happen is, and I hope what will happen is, if we keep the things in balance, right, you've got conscious making and conscious listening. And if the conscious listening keeps up with the conscious making, people will know what we're doing all the time because they're listening. The only reason I think that you would possibly feel that wine study was manipulative is because I said people would say, what music? Because they weren't noticing it. If they notice, they're playing German music, they think that's going to make me buy more German wine, I will, Then, that's kind of okay, isn't it? I think that's kind of, there's a fair negotiation that goes on there.
But you have to be very clever that you can listen to it.
I agree. And that is exactly why I've done now 4 TED Talks about sound, and I want millions more people to listen. And I'd love you to evangelize listening with all your friends. If we all start listening, it's good for our health, it's good for our behavior, and it's good for our productivity and our power in the world, you know, our expressiveness, the way we can make a difference in the world. All of that comes from better listening. And if you're listening really well, nobody can manipulate you with sound. Not much, anyway. It's only if you go unconscious. And if you go unconscious, that, you know, listening is one important way of going unconscious. Many people walk around almost completely unconscious. And it's very easy to manipulate people who are really unconscious. So really, my passionate message is get conscious. And listening is a great doorway to that. You know, thank you for a great question. I hope that answers it.
Thank you.
Was there another one over here?
My question is, with which jobs you started your company? What? Yeah.
Which jobs did we start with?
Yeah.
Well, that was a long time ago, 2003, and the world was very different. Very few people had thought about sound at all. And we started with an office in London, which was specially designed for meetings, and we put in some really quite radical stuff into there. The whole soundscape was birdsong, and that made some headlines. It was like birdsong good for meetings type stuff. So the media liked it. And there was some cool stuff in there, like if you opened the front door of that office, it made a cuckoo sing. The only people who knew that were the staff. So they knew when the door opened, but everybody else just thought it was part of the overall ambience. Much nicer than a beep or a bell or something like that. We had a cabinet of curiosities they'd put in there where there were lots of devices. And with many of them, if you stood in front of them, there was a pressure pad that would cause a relevant sound to come out of a loudspeaker above you, a hypersonic loudspeaker. Or if you touched them, you would set off a sensor. We had some bendables where you bend them and it creates MIDI signals that then you could play the cabinet. There were 3 or 4 of these, and you could have different people bending, and you would create music between the 3 or 4 of you by bending things. We even had electrodes on the leaves of a plant, and we turned the voltage difference across the leaf into MIDI. So the plant was playing a piece of MIDI, and you could hear it react as you came up to it, which was quite interesting. So there was a lot of cool stuff in there, and it made some headlines and got us noticed, and then out of that press we got some more jobs, really. So it was, in those days, doing something very different was a good idea. Yeah. I think the second job we got was auditing Heathrow Airport, and that came out of people I'd known in the past and word of mouth, really. The way we get most of our work is either word of mouth from people who know people, or the press, the media. Yeah. It's not easy still. Thanks for a great question.
Thank you.
Yes.
I have the question whether you found any differences in between cultures while you were researching on sound, as to, okay, this culture thinks this sound is really relaxing, while the other culture really thinks, okay, this is definitely not relaxing.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. We've worked all over the world, and it's been very interesting, actually. When we created soundscapes for a bank in Colombia, for example, one of the soundscapes we deployed was through a hypersonic above a thing that looked like a tree, and we used rainforest sound. We went and recorded some beautiful rainforest sound and made a long loop of it, and it was delivered. So it sounds like it's bouncing off the leaves of this tree. Now, that's the sound of that country. You know, Colombia, but I mean, Bogotá's on a plateau way above it, but most of the country is covered in rainforest. And so the people who live there, that's home, that sound. It wouldn't sound so comforting and refreshing if you did that in Düsseldorf, I don't think. Then, for example, working in Oman, Oman is a desert country, almost entirely desert. And so we used again, it was a bank actually, we used the sound of water. Because water there has rich significance. First of all, it's the sound of life. Secondly, it's the sound of wealth. If you can afford running water, you're pretty well off, because most people don't have running water. You know, like in hot countries, most times you have a fountain in a house. It's not to look at, it's to listen to. I think most fountains in most places actually to listen, and not Bernini in Rome, obviously, but you know, most of those little fountains in houses, they're to listen to, because the sound of running water means I can afford that, and we're safe, we've got something to drink, and it's also the sound of health and purity. So there's lots of symbolism about water sound, and if you deploy that in a room like a bank where they come in and it's 45 degrees outside, walk into air conditioning and the sound of running water, ooh, lovely. So yes, cultural differences are huge, and with music as well, of course. I mean, there are many, you know, some Chinese music sounds very discordant to our ears. Think of gamelan, you know, it's like Marmite. Some people love it, some people hate it. And yet Western music, unfortunately, is now starting to pervade the whole world and become more and more acceptable everywhere, which I think is a bit sad. But there's still plenty of variety out there, and you do have to be sensitive. I mean, again, if we're using birdsong in Oman, we wouldn't use British birds. It'd be completely wrong. So, you know, you use desert animals and desert sounds because that's where you are. Mm-hmm. So, great question, thank you. Any more for any more? Oh, yes.
You had this slide about the marketing development where control developed to co-creation and so on. My question is, if you think that this is going on to another direction someday, or even backwards, like the broadcast will start again, or what do you think about this development?
Well, broadcasting is an interesting word to use, because I think that's a whole industry that's in really big difficulty, just like printed media, printed news media. And it may well be that in a decade or two, the world is totally different for them. There may be no printed news media. There may be no broadcasters as we know them. I suspect that brands, the clever ones, are going to move into a position which is more like old-style patronage. So Mozart, as far as I know, wrote very little music that wasn't commissioned. Bach the same. I mean, almost all of Bach's music was paid for by somebody. It was commissioned. And I think there's a strong chance at the moment with the way that royalties are going, I mean, a lot of you, probably my children definitely, expect to be able to get music for nothing from everybody. And the licensing agencies are, do you have the story of King Canute here, standing on the beach trying to hold back the waves? It doesn't work. Well, that's an old story in the UK. So he was a king. He thought he was so powerful he could stop the tide coming in. I think that's what those royalty agencies are like at the moment. Trying to put locks on content is totally a waste of time. And so the producers of music have got to find a different economic model altogether. And I suspect a big part of that is going to be patronage by brands, so that you'll get bands and other music and sound creators aligning themselves with brands which they feel have got some sort of sympathy with them. It's already starting to happen where you get sponsored tours and sponsored songs. Coca-Cola have close relationships with various artists and so forth. It's called the band brand space. And some of you may benefit from it in years to come, who knows. So I think that's going to happen. And I do think as a bigger picture of that we'll see brands become kind of the stars of the virtual universe, where content starts to gravitate around them. And they start to pay to have great content delivered, not necessarily with kind of cheesy product placement and you know, overt sponsorship, but just delivered with compliments on this channel they've put together, which we therefore feel good about them for delivering, because it's a channel for people like me. So it might be, I don't know, Marks and Spencer's identify that there's a lot I like about them or whatever, and therefore they deliver a channel and I like it, and I therefore feel good about the brand, that kind of thing. So broadcasting, tough world to be in at the moment. Apart from Sky, most European broadcasting organizations that I know of are starting to feel the pinch, including the BBC. It's a tough world. Yeah, thank you. Keep them coming. Hello.
First, thank you for a brilliant speech.
Oh,
it was
thank
really
you.
nice. My question is if you have any experience in working with sound and soundscapes in museums or fairy tales or in this all exhibitional context.
Museum, yes, only a little bit actually, because there are some very, very good companies working in those fields doing amazing interactive sound installations. Like if you go to the Churchill War Rooms in London have got incredible interactive sound, and the Science Museum has got lots of lovely interactive stuff, and I'm sure here as well in museums. It's a rich field. We did some nice stuff in a museum in Shetland Islands off the north coast of Scotland, and we created a generative soundscape of Shetland with 3 scenes. There was sea, shore, and land, and each of the scenes, every time it rotated, they rotated about once every 5 minutes. And when it rotated back, it was very different because it was generative. So sea had all of the sounds of the animals that you actually get in the sea just off Shetland. Shore was the right birds, the right surf, and so forth. Land was things like, obviously, sheep, but also you had traditional songs, people singing traditional songs. You had tractors, you had the plane that comes in with their mail, and all these kind of really typical sounds delivered through a couple of hypersonic loudspeakers to create a really powerful experience in a particular part of the museum. So that was lovely to work on, actually. We had a lot of fun with that. So again, I think generative sound has got a lot to play out in those places. But I can't think of exhibitions. No, we've never done a big exhibition. Oh, not true. Okay, we did one in Dubai. We did an exhibition stand in Dubai where there was on the stand there was a bench, and they wanted the sounds of the city to be behind it. So we created a generative soundscape with surface transducers on the graphic. So the whole back plate was like a loudspeaker and was giving you nice diffuse sounds of the city. So those are the only 2 I can offer.
Okay, and when it comes to fairy tales, my experience is this is a very, very noisy place. Everybody wants to be heard and be listened to, and it sums up in a very big amount of noise. And sometimes I'm thinking about how this could be changed, which could be done to change this, maybe through spatial loudspeakers using, or I don't know.
So when you say fairy tales, do you mean a toy?
Ist das die richtige Wort? Messe? Fair. Okay. Oh, sorry. No, I just got this word in my head. I mean fairs.
Oh,
yeah.
Fairs. Yes.
Sorry. Just some completely other kind of thing.
That's a powerful sonic environment, and I don't suppose there's much that anybody's going to be able to do to control the sound in that space. They like to compete. I mean, there's a lot of classic sounds there. The steam organ of a merry-go-round, what do you call it? Merry-go-round, where the horses go up and down. All too often.
It doesn't mean a carnival. It means like business fairs.
Oh, an exhibition.
So it totally makes sense as well.
Okay. Different terminology. Okay, I thought you meant carnival. Okay.
No, I'm really talking about business fairs.
Business fairs, yes. Yeah. Acoustics, please, yes. For goodness sake. Oh.
Which I mean are very noisy places.
One of the things that we always recommend when we're working with shopping malls, for example, is that they set a law in their contract with the retailers who are in there. They set a rule that you can have 65 decibels at the threshold of your store, and that's it. Because some of them have got 85 or 90 decibels in there, and they have loudspeakers pointing out. So you walk past, and it's like this, and they pollute hundreds of meters of the store with their music. it would be great to have the same thing in an exhibition or fair. I hate those places for two reasons. One is everybody is always looking over your shoulder to see if anybody's got a more interesting name badge on. So there's not a lot of eye contact that goes on in those places. And secondly, because of the overpowering din, the noise of the whole thing, where you've got all of these stands with sound systems on, booming out, it would be great to put some rules on that. So that would be one thing. And then the acoustics of the spaces, shocking. Shocking. I've just left a book, actually, with Heike, which talks about that as is one of the areas, is conference spaces, and how the sound systems need to be far better, the acoustics need to be far better, so we actually have a pleasant experience.
So what do you think about using directional loudspeakers in a very big way, so everybody has to take his own...
on the stands, you mean?
Space, yeah.
Yeah, well, that could be quite effective, and there are other solutions too. You know, you can use transducers, or you can just have them pointing inwards at a modest level and just be sensible with it, not have them pointing outwards. But of course, everybody wants to get noticed. So I think it's a negotiation you have to have with people. There's a lot that can be done to improve most spaces, and that's a big one. So, yeah, great to point it out.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. So we have turned up. Thank you so much, Julian. If you have questions, maybe step up.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your attention. Thank you, Heike.